Okay, so Liberation Day, as we talked about in the opening, obviously that's what the Trump administration is calling it. But Carol, just like I did with you in the opening, Carol is going to give us a more direct point of view on this whole thing. What actually is happening? What should be happening? None of this ridiculous politicking stuff. Joining me now, Carol Roth, author of many wonderful books, including "You Will Own Nothing." Okay, Carol. I understand the Trump administration is branding with this whole liberation thing. Trump is really good at that. I get it. I get it. I get the game. You get the game. Neither of us are spring chickens, although I'm much older than you, I think. What are they talking about? What is Liberation Day?
I mean, I think the answer to that is that nobody really knows, Jesse, and that is part of the problem. Just like in relationships where communication is key to understanding and moving forward and having a happy life together, we're having a little bit of problem with the communication from this administration because there hasn't been, until today, a sit down with the public talking about, what is the purpose and the point here. But the bigger issue is when you talk about Liberation Day or you talk about making America wealthy again or any of these talking points is they're often in conflict with each other. So we're hearing that the American economy is going to be liberated from other countries and we're going to be wealthy, but then we're also hearing that it's about parity and making things even. And wouldn't it be great if everybody else dropped their tariffs and then we didn't have to worry about it? So it can't be both of those things. We're not going to get wealthy off of tariffs if everybody drops them. And I think that's part of the frustration here. I think the other frustration, in addition to sort of this communication and conflicts, is another C word, which is choreography, which is something that we've been talking about because there was so much optimism coming into this administration. We had a fabulous, first couple of weeks. Everybody's heads was spinning with all this great news. And I think from an economic standpoint, the liberation that Americans wanted was liberation from inflation and from the bad policies of the Biden administration. They wanted deregulation. They wanted some permanency and certainty around the tax cuts. And those were the kinds of things that were meant to help spur growth, increase consumer sentiment, help with investment and hiring and all of those things. And by going into tariffs as sort of the key part of the economic policy first, instead of settling those other things, I think it was an unforced error on the part of the Trump administration.
Okay, so let's actually focus on that, the uncertainty part of it, because Carol, honestly, I should probably check my Twitter feed as we have a discussion here, because every 5 minutes things are changing. They honestly may have changed in the 3 minutes since we started talking, where we have this tariff coming down, but they're backing off. We have this tariff, but now we're backing off. We have a tariff, but we're backing off. We have a tariff, but we're backing off. I'm 43 years old. I'm going to injure my neck if I keep looking back and forth at this point in time. What is the goal?
So a lot of people will tell you that this is art of the deal and that really we're just getting, completely screwed over. And I just have to laugh at that notion. We have a $29 trillion economy. We are not getting screwed over by the socialist and commies that have $2 trillion in their economy. It's just not happening. So this idea that, we need to really focus on this now really makes no sense. The idea that, these other countries do it, so it's a good idea. Again, we do not import our economic ideas from socialist and communist countries. It is bad that these are extra taxes on their people, and it's why their economies are suffering. And yes, we can do better in our economy, but the way we do better in our economy is not by creating barriers and less freedom here. It's really by deregulation. It's by better tax policy, and it's making it easier for people to do business. And as you mentioned, with the craning your neck, if you are a small business owner in particular, but also larger businesses and companies that are public, you cannot plan. You cannot make investments. You cannot hire, or at least you do not have the will to if you don't know what's going on and things are changing from seconds to second. So we need to unleash growth in this country. And the first place you're going to do that is by getting some certainty and getting that deregulation incentives in place instead of disincentives, and making the tax policy permanent and favorable. And then, if we need to get surgical about tariffs, because there are areas where it may make sense, in areas that affect our national defense, certainly is an areas that impact things like upcoming technology. But I'm really sick of this. Like, let's look back to the 1800s. We're in 2025, Jesse. Everything has shifted. The path forward here is very different than the path that existed in the 1800s. And that's what we should be focused on and talking about. And people cannot do this if this is moving around. There is no art of the deal if Americans cannot have some certainty around making investments, about hiring decisions, and about, feeling good about the economy.
Okay, so let's attempt to switch gears while talking about the same subject. That doesn't make any sense. But how do we get the manufacturing back, Carol? Because that is a critically important thing. It's not a small thing that the Rust Belt is now the Rust Belt. It's not a small thing that we can't make things here, that China can build ships and we cannot. That's a really, really, really big deal. How do we get it back?
So I think that we have to kind of part and parcel this. And yes, we can agree that when Bill Clinton walked China into the World Trade Organization, that was a horrible thing for the middle and working class, and a bad thing for our country. And Jesse, we're just not going to get some of that back. Some of the things, the small batch and small run manufacturing, things that require a lot of handwork, things that have a lot of regulation around it, we're just as a country not going to get there. And we have to realize that, whether it's China or Vietnam or India or Mexico, or somebody else is going to make those things. The question that you're asking, I think, is the legitimate one. And this is why we need to be surgical when it comes to tariffs. Things like building ships, things like building ammunitions, things like other critical supply chain items. That is a focus. And there should be incentives in order to get that done. Remove the barriers, remove the regulations, remove some of the ridiculous lawsuits that may be preventing this happening. But at the end of the day, we have some constraints in the terms of energy costs. I know that the Trump administration would like to get those down, but at some price, we cannot produce energy anymore, and we will not have any. So there's a constraint there. Maybe they can create some tax incentives to get that down a little bit, but it's not going to take it all the way down. And we also have people who want to make sure that Americans who are working get fair wages and good wages. And so when you have a high cost of energy, and you have a high cost of regulation, and you have a high cost of labor capital, that is only going to work in certain industries. So we should be laser focused on those areas and come up with the strategies, the incentives, the programs to make those front and center. And everything else should go by the wayside. We do not need to be focused on, for example, when my clients in the collectible toy industry, they're just not going to hand make dolls and fashion figures here the way that they did, maybe 100 years ago. So we need to be surgical about this. And I think that would make it much more understandable to everyone. Okay, we're going to focus on these sectors that make, are important for our national defense and important for our economy. And then everything else, we're going to move forward, understanding that the future is in technology and defense, and forget about everything else.
I actually knew a guy once who collected those little handmade toys. He was a very strange person. He had a lot of gerbils. Anyway, Carol, these companies are announcing that they're investing. We see every day, and I like that, but this chip manufacturer, they're investing here. Apple's going to invest here. They're investing here. Now, these are good political headlines, and I want people investing here, but what's the reality of this?
So the idea that a very large publicly traded company makes a decision between one day and the next because of some sort of political pressure is absolutely ridiculous. If they were planning to do something, they've been planning to do it for a long time, and they're leaning in to that news cycle in order to get a pat on the back from it. But anybody who believes that these big companies have all of a sudden changed their investment policy because of a push. I think I've got a bridge or apparently a gerbil or something to sell you. So I think that is pretty much not the case. There are areas where the administration can create incentives, and that can bring more investment to the United States. And there are, business and practical reasons, but it goes back to that, big plan that we were talking about, which is, appropriate regulations, available labor at a reasonable rate, great tax policy. And that's why if we start there, it's the logical place to unleash the growth that we've been talking about. And by the way, we all want the Trump administration to accomplish this. We're not saying this because we're trying to be mean to the administration. It's because we want the administration to succeed. And right now, in terms of business sentiment, in terms of consumer sentiment, and concern in terms of where we are going, we are not going in the right direction with any of those. And we want this country to succeed.
Finally, inflation, because a lot of this really comes down to inflation. I mean, we talk about these things, tariffs and regulations and shipping and things like that, but that doesn't necessarily affect most people, or at least they don't realize it does. What does is the cost of groceries, the cost of a home improvement. When I walk into Lowe's, I want to be able to afford things. Are we going to get any inflation relief anytime soon?
So what really impacts inflation over the long term, is the monetary supply and ultimately the purchasing power of your dollar over long periods of time. Tariffs may have sort of a short-term impact, but the longer-term impact really depends, in my opinion, on the fact that we're running wartime level deficits. And unless we can get those down, we're going to continue to be in a situation where we're going to have to make choices, and either the sacrifice is going to be the bond market, which would be really bad for everybody, the global financial markets, or it's going to have some other release valve. And it all really comes down at the end of the day, when you look at the different paths, the likelihood that there is going to be policy that needs to be enacted, and that is going to be inflationary. I mean, think about Trump putting pressure right now on the Federal Reserve to lower their rates. Well, the reason is because the interest that we are paying on our national debt at this point exceeds the cost of our defense spending. You cannot have a successful country when you're paying more in interest than you are for the defense of your nation. And so we have a ton of debt that needs to be refinanced. We have, multiple $trillion new deficits, new debt that needs to be financed, and we have interest rates that are near levels that we haven't seen in 15 years. It's not the highest that we've seen, but they're still at very elevated levels. And we don't have central banks around the world who want to be purchasers of our debt anymore. They've started to sell our debt and replace that with gold in their reserves. So something needs to happen here. Somebody's going to have to step in and be a buyer of debt. And I think that that's going to be, at some point, the Fed. It's going to approximate that quantitative easing that we saw. It may have a different name. It may be yield curve control, or it may be some special, pretty program wrapped in a bow. But at some point, they are going to have no choice in order to get that interest cost down. They're going to have to bring rates down, and everything has a lever. If you pushed on this one, something else changes, and the other side of the lever in all of the palatable choices is inflation. So you may get a reprieve, and we've seen, a little bit of a reprieve before it started picking back up again. But over the long term, that is the political choice I think they're most likely to make.
Right. No, we'll buy our own debt. Then you don't have any. It's brilliant. Carol, yes. Thank you. I appreciate it so much. I would thank you for coming to my YouTube channel, but I know how brilliant it is, and I know you love it here. So subscribe and watch. We're going to start really ramping things up and putting some funny stuff, some interesting stuff out there, some collaborations. Either way, my YouTube channel is officially the place to be. So stick around.